And hello, welcome to the first ASP.NET Community Stand-Up of the year.
Yay!
Very happy
New Year, everyone.
Yep.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. So I am John Galloway. I am a PM on the DevDiv community team, and today I'm joined by Dan Roth and Captain Safia Abdalla.
Yes. Hi, everyone.
So today we're talking about contributing to the ASP.NETCore repo.
Yes.
So, okay, so Dan, this is part of a series, right? You're kind of leading off the planning for .NET 10, and we did kind of a sort of like a teaser sort of thing at the beginning in December, and then now we're doing some
planning process, with the community, yeah.
So now we're kind of going to be doing some deep dives into that.
Yeah, so today we'll talk about how you can directly contribute to our, next release, or, even existing releases as well. Like you can fix bugs even in .NET 9, .NET 8 if that's something that you're passionate about. So we'll talk about how you can directly get involved in the process of developing the platform, helping identify bugs, participating in conversations, and then over the next few community stand-ups, we're planning to bring in the various sort of sub teams of the broader ASP.NET Core team to talk about their areas and engage with the community on what we're currently thinking about for .NET 10, and have a discussion with you all about what do you think about our current thoughts. What would you like to see prioritized? Where would you like to see us invest? So that will be happening through the month of January as we ramp up for the .NET 10 release wave to kick off. We expect the first .NET 10 preview release will probably go out. I think February is when preview one usually gets released publicly.
Awesome. Okay, well, let's start off with just a few community links. And of course, as soon as I say that, my mouse freezes. Okay, here we go. So I have posted them in the link in the chat. It is also here. And so let's start going. First of all, we have some wrap-ups. So James did some kind of, here, let me change my layout here. James did some 2024 wrapped posts at the end of the year, so that was kind of cool. So first of all, we've got this .NET Conf 2024 recap. So this was in November, but if you didn't watch it, if you didn't spend your December catching up on .NET Conf, like I'm sure a lot of us did, here is some of the highlights. So first of all, of course, the keynote. This was kind of fun behind the scenes. This was as they filmed James kicking it off at the beginning. So we have all the on-demand recordings, of course, and then kind of a roll-up of some of the top announcements. There's a link over to the demo codes and all the slides. This is something I think that's really cool. People may not know about is that we actually work pretty hard to collect the slides from the presenters, especially day 1 and 2, kind of right as soon as they finish. So both of you know this, right after you finish your presentations, what's your slides? And we've also got Peggy and other folks doing that. So that's really handy.
Word. Do your own little .NET Conf presentation. That's
well, there you go. Spoiler alert. But yeah, that's actually at the end of this. We've got still kind of wrapping up. We've got these local .NET Conf events. And then, the fun doesn't have to stop when the .NET Conf local events ends. These are hopefully slides people can use, for the next several months. And I think one other neat thing was we had some really cool customer stories. So there was, there was Copilot, there was the Fidelity Investments, and there was actually a deep dive half-hour session at the end of .NET Conf where the team came on and talked about how they actually built the Fidelity Active Trader Pro platform and how they used, it kind of goes deep into how they, made high performance graphics and all that sort of stuff. So,
yeah.
There's this banner up at the top of the page you may have seen, which is GitHub Copilot free in Visual Studio. So I might as well mention that here. So this is the announcement of that. Yeah. So I love this. I use Copilot all the time. And then sometimes I'll talk to people, students or just people that don't have, for whatever reason, they're like, oh, I'm not sure if I can pay for that. And it's like, you don't have to. So that's cool.
It was one of my holiday activities was like, learning to use more of the Copilot features, both GitHub Copilot and also a lot of the other productivity suite AI enhancements. It was a lot of fun. Like the GitHub Copilot workspace was one thing I was talking with John about just before this call. Like that's just a fantastic feature for, like, you can take a GitHub issue and it can like plan out what needs to be done to fix it and create the plan for implementing it, and put together commits and a PR for you that you can review every step of the way. It's just amazing technology, and now it's so much easier to get your hands on it and try it out yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned workspaces, and that's something a bit meta here, but we actually use we use GitHub Actions for our blog post reviews to go through and, just check for things like, okay, you said link here. Well, there was no actual link, or, it's different things like that. And so we actually do a lot of kind of validation. And James actually set something up during the break where we should update our validation. And he used a workspace and actually did a pretty good job with it. So, and then there's also my mouse has chosen a wonderful time to freak out. Okay, there's also a little bit more information on that previous post links to this and calls out you get 2,000 completions and 50 chat messages per month. So pretty neat. There's also a top blog post of 2024. Nice look back here. Of course, the announcing .NET 9. There is the perf improvements in .NET 9. This is the 300 pager. So I actually went through during I was trying to put together some slides of like highlights from his presentation and also his post, and it was really hard to get like what are the top things, but so yeah, that's that awesome 300-page post, and then also the video. This is a neat one. I'm not sure if enough people noticed this one, but we actually did a post on ASP.NETCore metrics and Grafana and .NET. Yeah. So this is really handy. People, I'm sure, have seen the really cool graphs with Aspire, but you can just directly hook up the OpenTelemetry into a Grafana dashboard. So that's neat. And then, of course, Aspire. We had this cool one about smart components and the ecosystem there. So
I just blow by Aspire, like, oh yeah, there's this Aspire thing that we shipped. Like,
it's funny. It's all Aspire all the time lately for me. So
too much Aspire. We don't need to talk about them. They've already gotten their airtime. I mean, still, I'm a big fan of Aspire, so I guess.
Yeah,
if you haven't started using Aspire, you should try it.
It is super phenomenal. I keep learning about more things. There's more cool features that like snuck into the .NET 9 release. We did a whole workshop at VS Live Orlando in November, and it was really neat going like people would ask a question. I'm like, pretty sure about that, and then pop over and show them a sample, and it's like, so yeah, there's a ton of neat stuff in Aspire.
I think we talked a little bit about this in one of the previous community stand-ups, but the one thing I hope that every ASP.NET Core developer understands is that .NET Aspire is for you. Like, it's not a separate thing. It's not a different app model. It's not like you have to write your app differently or take your existing app and redo it in Aspire. No. Aspire is a set of tools and patterns that improve, elevate your existing ASP.NET Core apps. You can add Aspire to an existing ASP.NET Core app and start to get all the goodies from the Aspire. So if you haven't looked at it and you're an ASP.NET Core dev, you should take a look at Aspire.
It's yeah, and that's something where I think initially we're like, it can do these huge, complicated applications, and people are like, oh, I don't have a huge, complicated. So that's a really good point, Dan. Is like,
I have to start doing a Kubernetes cluster, something with containers.
Right.
No, you don't. It can publish containers and it can publish to Azure Container Apps and do all those things, but that is optional. It's not a required part of the model. Yep. So there are dev time improvements you can get out of Aspire today. That's
Yep, very cool. Let me see. I want to make sure there's enough time, so I'm going to blaze a little bit by some of these. But yeah, we talked about that. There was a C#12 blog series. David Pine did these. So and we're already on C#13, but C#12, there were like 4 posts that he did where he went kind of deep into them. Really cool code samples and stuff. And then we also just called out in here that there are other workload specific. So we've kind of merged things down on the .NET blog, but on the .NET blog, there is in the header, there is a drop down where you can say, I want to see just the posts about Aspire or, you know, about AI and stuff like that. And those filter to those categories. So that's that. And then the last thing I think we do in here is talk about just the cool new look. So this is an update to the DevBlogs platform. You'll notice over on the right side here, we've got this table of contents. There's this read next, which is actually pretty useful. There's a breadcrumb thing. There's just a lot of neat little enhancements in here, readability stuff. So. All right.
Nice.
Top videos of the year. So there's a warning, both of you are going to see your faces on here very soon. We have the What is C# series. We have the Deep.NET series with Hanselman and Toeb and other folks going, really deep into .NET things. These are fun to watch because it's, just like, hey, why don't we implement async await like from scratch? And it's like, so some really cool internals there. Of course, all the .NET Conf stuff. Here's the beginner series. So we've got the Blazor series and then the API series.
I hear those are really good. Those are definitely worth
the best.
Yeah, they should be on Netflix soon. I'm hoping.
Ooh, exciting! Golden Globes incoming.
I'm telling you, I had poor luck finding good watching material over the holidays, so I think this would have been your shot at the Oscars.
Yeah.
Is that a low? You're saying we needed a low bar?
I'm just saying, this could have been your breakout performance. Yeah. All right. So we had the Aspire series. We had some Let's Learn, just on .NET, lots of stuff. So this is just kind of a PSA. This came out during December. Just sharing this to in case you're affected. So the short story is there are some CI links that pull from Azure Edge CDN, and the Azure Edge CDN ran off of Edge.io, which has gone or is going bankrupt. And so now that's actually being changed over to some new domains. So there's kind of the short story is, you should use these new CDNs, builds.net, .microsoft.com, etc. There's also some AKA links in here. So this kind of has explanation of if you were on this CDN, this is what you should do.
I think specifically if you were using the old install scripts, I'm guessing you need to switch over to the new ones because the old install scripts probably are pointing to the wrong URLs now.
Exactly. Yep. And there's more about that in the issue here, and it talks specifically about that. And then there's some good Q&A in here too, where people say like, hey, I'm doing this, does this matter or whatever? But to your point, Dan, exactly. There's, here are examples of some of the install scripts and things here, definitely if you've got like Azure Edge listed in your script as well, etc.
Yeah.
So.
That .NET install.sh and then the PowerShell version of it, I'm guessing are the ones that people probably use to do those installs that leverage those URLs. So, if you've touched those install scripts before, if you've pulled them from our docs or from our download instructions, like just be aware you may need to do an environment update.
Yep. All right. With that, I'm going to turn over to you folks. We've got two links that you sent me, Dan. One is the contributing docs.
Yeah. And we're going to be talking all about contributing today. That's the goal. The idea is to enable you and your organizations and your friends, members of the .NET community, to be able to contribute to .NET and specifically ASP.NETCore. The contributor docs that we have on the repo go through all of the different ways that you can contribute and the steps you need to go through if you actually want to set up your machine, build the repo and create a PR and all that stuff. And we're going to go through that in detail today. So if you've ever had a dream of submitting a pull request to the ASP.NETCore repo and getting a change in, we're going to help you out with that goal today. I wanted to step back just initially and talk a little bit about, why should you contribute? I'm sure you're all busy. We're busy too. You have your day jobs. You have your lives that you manage. Like who has time to do this? I think there are a number of really good reasons to contribute back to open source projects like ASP.NETCore. One is that, well, maybe there's some issue or some improvement to the platform that you'd like to see done, and you can take that problem by the reins and handle it. Get that fix in that you've always wanted to have fixed, or that feature that you've always wanted added to the platform. You can improve the platform in that way, and by doing so, you're not just improving the platform for yourself, but you're of course improving it for the entire community. This also enables you to increase your expertise in .NET and ASP.NETCore. Instead of just knowing how to use the framework and understanding how to leverage the features, you're actually peeking under the hood, looking at how it's implemented, and really getting a deep understanding of what's happening inside of the framework. So you increase your expertise in the framework by contributing in this way. And there's of course also the street cred that comes from getting commits into large open source projects that you can put on your resume and share with your friends and tweet about, and so be proud that you made a contribution to a major project that is used by projects big and small. Like some of the largest services on the planet are being run on .NET and on ASP.NETCore. Many of the products at Microsoft are running on this platform, and you can feel that you have added to that value. So lots of good reasons to contribute, and there's lots of ways that you can contribute. It's not all about getting code into the repo. Just giving feedback and opening issues is an awesome way to contribute to the stack, letting us know what's important and what we should be prioritizing. That's the data that we're using right now as part of our planning exercises. And so every time you take the time to actually create a GitHub issue, that is immensely valuable, and we really appreciate that. Or even just giving the thumbs up reaction on an issue that you care about, or putting a comment on one of those issues saying, yeah, this is affecting me too. That lets us know it's not just one person. There are multiple people being impacted by this, and we should take a stronger look. There are other things you can do. There are discussions that happen on GitHub, both in GitHub issues and in the GitHub discussions that you can participate in. Maybe there's a design discussion happening about how a particular feature should be implemented, or how it should be how it should function. You can hop in, share your scenarios, share your ideas on what would work best, and really help us refine those user experiences so the features that we ship are as useful as possible. You can help people with their own problems that are having trouble using ASP.NETCore for the first time, newer users, and help them be successful, and help the community to be more productive as a broader ecosystem. And then, of course, there's the actual code contributions. If there's a change that you would like to have made to the platform, you can submit a PR and work with us on that. And we're going to spend most of the time today talking about that and how you actually do code contributions. Code contributions could be anything from small changes, like you want to do there's a typo in some API ref comments that you just want to fix up, and you can just click the edit button probably on the page and on github.com and just make the change right there and submit the PR right away. I do this all the time myself, actually, like even in our docs, like in the ASP.NETCore docs, it's very easy to make documentation contributions that way. Strongly encourage you to do so. I just did one yesterday where someone had mistyped I think it was the .NET install workload command. They had written it as .NET install workflow, and it's like, that's not right. And make a quick edit, submit the PR, gets merged in the next day, and you can pat yourself on the back that you made the docs better. But also even more significant features. Yeah, go ahead, John. Yeah.
Well, it's so easy. Like, so as an example, I did that yesterday. Like, I was reading some docs and 2 words were backwards, and I just clicked the edit button, create the pull request, popped it in. A few hours later, it's merged. Like, I mean, it really is a smooth workflow. I'm impressed with how
very easy. If doing doc updates, very simple to do. And I encourage you to go. If you see a problem with the docs, go ahead and just click there's a little. Actually, do you want to show it, John? Who's the screen up right now? Is that me? That's you, right? Yeah, go open up like docs.asp.net and click on a random page, and just make sure people know where this is. Because the flow is trivial.
I mean, I was gonna go to like learn. Like, right? Is that what you were talking about?
Either the docs.asp.net will redirect to learn.
Oh,
This
I
is
didn't
fine.
know that.
But yeah, there's a page. So like they'll see the little pencil. So it's the little pencil that we wanted to highlight right there. If you click on that, that'll take you right to the file on GitHub that is being used to publish that doc. And you can just then edit this file right here and submit a PR based off of this file.
And I'm not signed into GitHub, but if I was, I would just click, edit, type it right in the page, fill in the thing. Boom.
Yep. Alternatively, if you go back to the page,
this here.
Yeah. The doc page. Like if you scroll, just go back. And if you scroll down to like the bottom, I think usually at the bottom there's like if you don't want to do the change yourself, you can open a documentation issue. There's a link right there. It says open doc issue. That will just open an issue in the corresponding repo for the docs, and then have some doc rater or some other community member take care of it for you if you don't feel comfortable editing the markdown yourself. So those are the kind of like small changes that really anyone can make, but contributions can also go all the way up to even larger, more impactful feature level contributions. If your organization, like if your company is, if your success is based on the .NET platform, I really strongly encourage you to think about how you as a organization could be dedicating resources to help the .NET platform be better and improve. By doing that, it helps your company, and then also helps the broader ecosystem. We recently had a partnership with Syncfusion, which is a large component vendor that has been doing this. They decided that .NET MAUI was something that they were really cared about deeply and that they're passionate about. They ship .NET MAUI controls and components. And so we work with them, and they have dedicated a significant number of resources to not only improving .NET MAUI itself by fixing bugs and contributing directly to the .NET MAUI repo, but also contributing some of their .NET MAUI controls as free open source components that anyone can use. And now we actually include a bunch of the Syncfusion controls in our .NET MAUI templates. There was a blog post about that recently that you can take a look at. So all those things are possible. Everything from small all the way to an organizational level commitment. If for the bigger ones, encourage you to reach out to us. Talk to us first before you spend a bunch of time writing a bunch of code, so that we know what you're doing and that we agree on the direction and the vision for the platform. Sometimes people submit PRs and they've written a bunch of stuff and they think they've done something, and we look at it, we're like, well, it's not exactly the direction we want to take ASP.NETCore or .NET right now. Sorry you did all that work, but no. and that as project owners, we have to sometimes make those difficult decisions just because we have to think about the health of the platform, the maintainability of the platform. So please talk to us first before you go do a big PR, a large amount of work, just to make sure that your time is well spent. So that's my little pitch on why you should contribute and how you can contribute. And Safia, do you want to sort of start walking us through a little bit about what does this look like? Like Safia does this every day.
Yeah.
And it'd be great to see what does it take to actually get a PR into the repo.
Sure. Okay, John, do you want to bring my screen up?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So up on here, I've got the ASP.NETCore repo on GitHub. If you haven't seen this before, ta-da, here it is. It's open source. You can check it out, .NET/ASP.NETCore. And I want to talk a little bit about how you can make specifically code contributions or contributions in the source code. I really want to +1 what Dan was saying about source-based contributions not being the only way that you can contribute. He brought up some really great ones. If you see an issue, +1 it. If you see a bug report that you have also experienced, but maybe the person who reported it did not provide a complete repro and you have one, share yours. There's all sorts of small ways that don't involve touching the code base in order to contribute to ASP.NETCore and help the team of maintainers kind of triage issues and investigate things and whatnot. So those things aside, let's say that you're particularly interested in making code or documentation contributions to the ASP.NETCore repo. I want to talk a little bit about what that looks like, what you'll need to do, and where to find all the things in the repo and some of our practices and habits and how things go. So a couple of things. There are requirements before you can contribute. They're not hard requirements. You need to have a GitHub account. It's helpful if you're familiar with things like Git, opening pull requests, kind of using the GitHub interface, all of that good stuff. And there's lots of resources online you can use to get familiar with those. And of course, if you're here, you might already be familiar with .NET and C# and ASP.NETCore, and those are kind of prerequisites for contributing. So the prerequisites are there, but they're pretty small. So you have all the prerequisites, you know .NET, you know C#, you're familiar with ASP.NETCore, you want to contribute. But what can you work on exactly? There's a couple of places you can go to find issues that you can address on the ASP.NETCore project. And the thing I will draw your attention to is if you head over to the Issues tab in the repo, there is this Help Wanted tag that we apply on all issues that are kind of like up for grabs. We will accept a PR from a community member or anybody with help resolving this issue. So if you want something that is kind of been designated as kind of a smallish issue to fix, something that's not going to take you like multiple days of work or require that you know like deep internals of ASP.NETCore to address, you can check out these Help Wanted ones. And the etiquette here, as kind of Dan was emphasizing earlier, it's just kind of, if you're interested in working on an up for grabs issue, post a comment on the issue first saying, hey, I'd like to work on this. And then usually somebody from the contributor team will say, hey, yeah, sure, go ahead. And then that kind of lets you know that there will be somebody there on the other side to review your PR or your pull request once you open it. And we'll kind of talk a little bit about the review process later on. So there's this collection of issues that have been labeled as Help Wanted. They're kind of extra small to small, t-shirt sizing, kind of bite-sized little things that anybody could work on. Oftentimes, I think like what most people are actually interested in is like scratching their own itch. So you might have a bug that you encountered while building an application or something, and you find the issue for that bug on the repo, and you're like, I want to fix this bug because it's a bug that I ran into. And maybe it's not tagged Help Wanted, or maybe it's like in the backlog and it hasn't been looked at in a while or something like that. Just because it's not tagged Help Wanted or it doesn't have any recent activity on it doesn't mean you can't post that comment to ask, hey, can I open a PR to resolve this? Here are my ideas for how I think it should be solved. Like, no one's kind of gonna immediately poo-poo you if you kind of just kind of start the conversation about being interested in working on something. But I think, again, it's all about like communication and sharing your intent to work on something, and kind of communicating your ideas and proposals ahead of time. That makes it a little bit easier to manage the whole process, and it helps avoid something that I know is like super awkward for me as somebody who has to review PRs sometimes. Like Dan was saying, you might get a PR for something that, you know, is not implemented quite right, or maybe it's not a PR we're ready to take at the moment because it conflicts with something else that's going on, or many number of reasons. And then you're kind of in the awkward position of having to tell somebody, we can't take this PR right now. So if you kind of communicate intent ahead of time, we can like kind of help get to on the same page about things before like the actual spending time writing code and tests and all of that stuff happens. So yeah, you've got the issues that are labeled Help Wanted, and then you have the entire like backlog of all the 3,500 issues that are open on ASP.NETCore that you can chime in and express your interest in resolving. Some issues are not just bug fixes. Some issues may require a considerable amount of design or API review, and that's where it brings up the 2 points that John and Dan brought earlier about our API and design process. So whenever there is a problem that requires a new API proposed or surface area in ASP.NETCore, we have this API proposal issue template that you can open. And this basically allows you to kind of describe what the proposed API is going to be, how it might be used, some of the alternative designs that we might consider for an API. And this is generally a prerequisite for anything where it's kind of public API surface area that anyone using ASP.NETCore might end up calling. And before it gets applied in code that is merged in the repo, it goes through an API review process that allows us to kind of just sanity check, hey, are the names right? Does this follow best practices for other things in the repo? Yada, yada. If you want more information about the API review process, the best place to go is if you head over to the root of the repo, there's this like docs directory. And here we've got a bunch of different docs. Oh my gosh, we actually write docs. Yes, we do. We've got a table of contents.
In the repo, right? Particularly people who are engaging in the engineering. Separate. There's also the docs for how to use the
Yes.
framework, and these are the docs. How do I help implement the framework?
This is engineers writing docs about how to engineer on the product that other people write docs on. So fun. But yeah, so there's in the docs repo, there is documentation that we've written about kind of like how we work on ASP.NETCore. So you can see one of the first links here is documentation about our API review process. And if you take a look at this, it has this wonderful graph that talks about how you can assign the correct labels on API review related issues and kind of the process they go through before being approved and then becoming something that we are ready to merge into the code base.
So if someone's trying to propose some new API surface area, do they need to go through the API review process first, or do they do their implementation PR of the proposed API first? What's the right order of things?
Okay, great question. So in practice, it is always a little bit better to start doing some parts of the implementation as you're drafting your API proposal. And that is because doing parts of the implementation can often reveal aspects of the API that might make it like too difficult to implement, or you might realize, oh, actually I need this other API here that I wouldn't have realized I needed until I did parts of the implementation. So in my day-to-day work, I find that it's always a little bit helpful to spend some time prototyping a little bit of the implementation just to get a really accurate sense of what the full API surface area should actually be. And then that's really helpful also because when you write your API proposal, it's going to be more thorough because you're kind of informed by the fact that you've kind of done some prototyping and implementation work on it before you opened the review issue.
Yep. The API proposals almost always need to be grounded, usually in some implementation to be practical, and it also gives you a chance to try them out, right? Like you have at least initial implementation of the API. How does it feel to actually use it? For people that are maybe less involved with framework design, you may wonder why we spend so much time like fretting over the APIs. Once an API goes into our framework, it's basically baked. Like we have very high backwards compatibility requirements for version-to-version upgrades of .NET. So once an API goes in, it's not like we can just do a breaking revision of it in the next version. So we are very careful to try and make sure the API is right, so that once it goes into a supported release, it's ready to be maintained for the long run. We can make breaking changes, but we really want to avoid doing that if at all possible, because that disrupts users like you that are trying to upgrade from .NET 8 to .NET 9 to .NET 10 and so forth.
Yeah, totally. It's the most high stakes and thrilling part of the job is like your API proposal that you got.
Okay, I've got a good question in the chat here from Ninja Ola. So, and I know you're kind of going into like the API design and the PR, like issue and PR, like kind of like larger changes. This one here, just is there a beginner friendly label for issue? Imposter syndrome is a real thing. Like people don't want to ask a question or do something wrong, so what's the best way to find those kind of beginner getting started questions?
Yeah, the help
Or-
wanted label is going to be the one that has those kind of super beginner friendly ones. And if you are concerned about your approach for resolving a bug or something, like feel free to ask questions on the issue itself. Like I'm always happy to explain to somebody and kind of give pointers to like, hey, you're going to need to change this line of code, and then you're going to need to add some tests in this file and maybe share some more details. So I think generally everyone on the team is pretty friendly and open to answering questions. So the help wanted is kind of beginner friendly things. And then if you still feel uncertain about approach or how you might do something, feel free to ask questions. Any question is totally valid to ask if you want to kind of clarify how you might go about doing something.
Cool.
And by beginner friendly, to be clear, I think what we really mean is, beginner to the repo.
Contributing, yeah.
It is true that ASP.NETCore is a large and complicated project.
And mature.
It's not a small repo. It has lots of stuff going on in it. So if you're really a new dev trying to just, cut your teeth, this might be a lot to take on initially. That said, there are probably issues in there that are very simple, that can be as simple as just like fixing up some API ref docs types of things that anyone really could do. But it will still involve probably at some point building the whole ASP.NETCore repo, which is a little bit more involved than just a vanilla .NET project. Setting up the tests and the infrastructure for that as well. So there's something to be aware of. If you really are new as a developer, there may be other projects that are smaller, a little more approachable. But these are certainly the issues that we feel are shovel-ready work, fairly simpler in terms of like the set of issues that are involved with working with ASP.NETCore.
Yeah. And I will add that if you see something as you're using ASP.NETCore that can be improved, we've talked a lot about XML doc comments here. Like, feel free to open the issue saying, hey, I found a typo in this doc comment, or the XML doc comment on this API is incomplete, or it confused me. And then we'll kind of work through how we can improve the docs from there. So there's also things are not limited to the set of issues that are just on the repo. If you see something that can be improved, you can also kind of start that conversation too. It's kind of a garden that we're collectively tending. So anyone can plant a seed or pluck a weed.
One other good question. I want to encourage the live questions. So this one here, why doesn't Microsoft just recruit more developers, basically hire more developers instead of requiring community to do it?
That's a great question. So and I know it's very tempting to think of Microsoft that we have like giant bags of money and then we can just throw as much money at anything as we can. But we are a business. Like, we do have to prioritize where we spend our dollars, and we do spend a lot of dollars investing in .NET for a bunch of reasons. It's a critical investment for us for our own products. Like, we build Exchange and Bing and Dynamics 365. Like, a lot of our big Microsoft products are all built on .NET. Azure, a bunch of the Azure services are all built on .NET. So we do invest heavily in the .NET platform, from the runtime and the C# language all the way up to the application frameworks. And we have hundreds of devs, I think, on the order of working on the entire stack. And then, of course, add on top of that the tooling. Like, we build the language services and the editors and the debuggers that go into Visual Studio Code to enable your developer experience. So we do spend a lot of money on .NET, which is interesting because to a large extent, .NET at least as a framework and a platform it's free. It's a free open source project. It's not actually a direct monetization play. So we do invest heavily in .NET, but there is limits. Like, it is not unbounded how much money we can spend on the .NET platform. And this is where the community can absolutely elevate the platform further. And any developer ecosystem really needs that healthy ecosystem and community around it to really thrive. It is definitely true that we can't do it all alone. We can do a lot, and we do a lot. We build the runtime and the language and the all this stuff, but we can do even more with your help. So yeah, it's just the case of limited engineering resources. I mean, compared to some ecosystems, I would say Microsoft actually does a ton of stuff in .NET versus what happens in other developer ecosystems, which are much more community based, like think Python or a lot of the JavaScript stuff. There's not one company that really kind of owns those ecosystems, and they rely completely on a community to grow those ecosystems. We want to do both. We invest as a company in .NET, and we also want to enable our community to be as productive as possible with .NET as well.
Okay. I've got one other question, which is sort of a little like off on the side, but I think is worth getting into. Like, so these repos, the code is generally kind of C# like, for instance, here's a question, F#. Is this applicable to like an F# developer as well?
Yeah, I can chime in on that. There are some F# related contributions that you can make on ASP.NETCore. I know one of the contributions that has come up in the past is improving certain parts of the dynamic code gen for minimal APIs to work with certain like F# constructs. We do have an F# minimal API sample. So there are opportunities like that to contribute with F# specific things. Now, it's not writing F# code, but it might consist of writing tests for F# related projects. The actual implementation itself of ASP.NETCore, we don't have any like F# code in there as far as I know. But you can make contributions that improve F# based ASP.NETCore applications. And then in addition, while we're on kind of this thread of like, is it just C#? There are parts of ASP.NETCore that are in other languages, and we'll touch on this in the next section I'll go through, but there is Java code in there. For example, in Signal R, there is JavaScript code in Blazor that you will find. There is a fair bit of C-based code in IIS and some of the server-based implementation. So it's largely C#. You will find a sprinkling of like non-C# stuff, but C# is the bulk of it.
A lot of the Blazor stuff, I think, is also written in TypeScript. So there's a bunch of TypeScript code.
Yes, TypeScript / yeah.
Okay, I'll let you get back to it.
Okay, cool. So we kind of talked a little bit about like issues, how you find them, whether it's help wanted or something that like is scratching your own itch that you kind of start a conversation about resolving. And now you are ready to write code. So how do you do it? We're back in the docs directory that I showed you earlier, which is kind of where the team keeps all of the operational based docs. There's this glorious build from source.md file that you will find. And it talks about how you can fork, clone, and build the ASP.NETCore repo onto your local machine so that you can make contributions. Now, the way this document is structured is kind of designed to be like a pick your target environment type thing. So if you are somebody who is using Visual Studio on Windows, there is a set of instructions that is optimized for that. If you, like me, are on a non-Windows based operating system like a Mac or a Linux based ecosystem, and you're using VS Code, there is a set of instructions about that. So you can kind of scroll through the document and you'll see we have categories that are, hey, if you've got Visual Studio on Windows, if you've got a non-Visual Studio based editor like VS Code or anything else on Windows, Linux, or Mac, there's a set of instructions. And then also, if you are like not wanting to do anything on your local machine, we actually have code spaces and configuration for dev containers set up on the ASP.NETCore repository. So you can make contributions entirely within like a web-based browser environment with code spaces or locally using the dev containers extension for VS Code. So there's a couple of different ways that you can set up your preferred development environment. Go with what you're already comfortable with. When I joined the ASP.NETCore team, I came from like a Python JavaScript background, and VS Code was my like home ground editor. I came from like a Linux background, so I'm super comfortable with like Unix-based experiences. So that's what I tend to use, and that's how I've contributed to ASP.NETCore for the past like 5 years. So you definitely don't just have to have Visual Studio on Windows in order to contribute. It's in a place where you can like work with multiple different editor environments. So that's pretty neat. Cool. So we're gonna do it live. I'm gonna fork, clone the repo, and then talk a little bit about how you can build it locally and just kind of some of the patterns that you might see in the repo that are kind of unique or you might not see in a .NET or C# project that you work on. Because one of the kind of interesting things that we need to do in ASP.NETCore is we kind of have to build ASP.NETCore and test ASP.NETCore in the ASP.NETCore repo. So there's like some bootstrapping shenanigans that need to happen. So we'll talk a little bit about how those show up in the ways that you write code. And we'll talk about like building and testing and all of that stuff. Cool. So let's get started. I'm going to head over to the ASP.NETCore repo. One of the first things that you're going to need to do is make a fork of the repository. Generally, you are not going to have permissions to push branches on the actual repo that's in the .NET org. So you will need to make a fork of the repository under your personal GitHub org in order to be able to make contributions. And this amazing little button here is what will help you do that. You can see there's like 10,000 people who've already done it. So that's kind of pretty neat. So if you click fork, you'll get this kind of experience where you can pick which organization you want to create your fork under. I would typically pick my personal org, which is Captain Safia on GitHub. You can actually see I'm being told the fork already exists, and that's because I've already kind of gone through this process before, but if you haven't, you'll kind of have to do that yourself. So let's go ahead and check out my own fork. I'll just go ahead and head to it via the URL directly. How about I do that? Okay, cool. So this is my fork of the ASP.NETCore repo. Pro tip, I think GitHub rolled this feature out like maybe a couple of years ago, but I'll just bring it up here in case people haven't worked with forks recently. There is this like sync fork button that GitHub has on the user interface that will update your fork's main branch and sync it with the main branch on the origin.
That's nice.
Yep. Super neat. Yeah, you don't have to. Yeah, it's pretty neat. You don't have to worry about doing any kind of merging or updating locally. You can just kind of use the sync fork every now and then. And
I've used that. It's worked well. Yeah. I was like, is this actually gonna? It actually worked. I was like, okay.
Yep. Pretty neat. Okay, cool. So I've got my fork. Head to the docs. The next step is to clone the code base locally with the fork that I just created. Okay. I have to like point this out because it's like kind of slightly annoying if you forget to do it when you clone. The ASP.NETCore repository contains some submodules, which are basically references to external GitHub repositories. And the submodules, if you go into the source directory, you'll see there's like, I think just 2 of them at the moment. We've got source modules that are used to reference message pack and Google test. And when you have a GitHub or a Git repository with submodules, in order to be able to clone not just the repository at the top level, but also any submodules that it references, you need to do what's called like a recursive clone. So it can kind of go into the submodules and pull those and yada, yada. So you want to make sure that when you call git clone to pull that repo, you pass in this recursive flag. If you forget to do that, there is a way to initialize the submodules after you've cloned, but it always just saves a headache to do it ahead of time.
It looked like those submodules were for like the gRPC stuff, right? Like message pack or actually, we use message. Maybe we use message pack other places.
I think it's in
Blazor servers.
Yep, Blazor. Yeah, this actually a good. I'm gonna kick off my clone and then I want to kind of talk a little bit about what you just brought up, which is the ASP.NETCore repo is sort of, how don't want to call it a mono repo because I feel like that's inaccurate use of the term, but it's got everything in there. It's got Blazor, it's got MVC, it's got gRPC, it's got minimal APIs, it's got SignalR. It's huge. There's a bunch of different directories for different things. Generally, stuff is factored out in a way where, components, the source components directory is all of the Blazor specific stuff. And you can kind of navigate to just that directory and kind of interact with only Blazor specific things, gRPC, etc. But it is kind of it's the kitchen sink of all the ASP.NETCore things. So there's a lot of directories, but usually when you contribute, you're only kind of contributing within one or two directories under the source folder.
I mean, I think it also speaks to that. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in ASP.NETCore. Like, it's not like all these things are separate things. They're all part of ASP.NETCore. ASP.NETCore is very much a like batteries included kind of framework. Whereas a lot of other frameworks rely on the community to provide all the different pieces, like whether it's output caching or rate limiting or whatever. Like ASP.NETCore just ships a lot of these components in the box. It's all included there. Someone was asking about whether or not we use the Git large file system, Git LFS. I think
LFS.
that's for like a large.
Yeah, we don't. I believe that's for things like images, or if you like, I think
files.
some people will push like SQL-like databases to their Git repos, stuff like that. We don't have anything of that sort in the repository. Most of it's other than the submodules, most of it is like standard source files. And shell scripts and stuff like that.
The only .NET repos I've worked on with that have been like AI based ones that had like training data and had like big dumps of data. But
Yep. Okay. Were there any other questions before I jumped into the?
Let's keep going. Let's keep going.
Okay. Let's keep going.
I want to see this build.
Oh my gosh, 10:56. Okay. We're doing it live. Okay, so now I've got it cloned locally. Next up is at the top level of the ASP.NETCore directory, you want to run a restore. And the restore is basically going to do a couple of things. Notice here I'm running the restore shell script. There is also a restore PowerShell script if you're on a Windows-based environment. We generally have PowerShell and shell script based things to all of the stuff in the repo. So the restore is going to do a couple of things. One of the things it will do is it will configure a locally installed .NET SDK for the repository. And this is really important because one of the things about contributing on the ASP.NETCore repo is that we're generally on the latest and greatest of everything. So let me pop open this global.json file and you'll see what version of the SDK we are on. Do you see that? We're like on 10.0.100-alpha. This is like the alpha builds of the .NET 10 SDK is what we build the ASP.NETCore repo under. So we're kind of like always dog fooding the latest stuff. And so generally you want this like alpha build installed locally under the ASP.NETCore directory. And we have some scripts that will activate that locally installed .NET into your path and configure it so that you're not having to like install alpha builds or preview builds globally.
That's cool.
So the restore script will do that, and then it will run a restore on all of the projects in the repository.
This is I don't want to interrupt you too much, but this is a really nice improvement over previous years, because I remember trying to like do some of this stuff years ago and it was like a science project, and it's really nice having these scripts and the global JSON and stuff like that to configure things.
Yep. Cool. So generally you want to only run the restore at the top level. Do not run the top level build. I mean, you can if you want to, but it is very scary because, like I was saying, it will try to build everything in the ASP.NETCore repo, which includes all of the different subcomponents we talked about: Blazor, SignalR, minimal APIs, all of ASP.NETCore. I have had it bring a few computers to its knees back when I had some underpowered machines. And generally, if you're contributing, making small contributions, you don't need to build all of ASP.NETCore. what you want to do is build the particular feature area or project area that you're working under.
Should there be like a badge or something like I have built the entire
the ASP.NETCore? It's really funny because I think one of the things we did a while back is we used to have a build script, like a build.sh in the root, and we actually moved it to a different subdirectory so that people would not be tempted to run it, because then it's just like you would have a bad time. But where you do want to run the build script, or where I would recommend it, is you've identified an issue. Let's say that you want to fix a bug in, let's do OpenAPI, since that's like my fun pet project. That's where the party is. So let's say you want to fix a bug in OpenAPI. What you want to do is build just the OpenAPI directory in the repo. So I'm going to go ahead and CD into it. And if I list all the files here, I'll see that there are build scripts within the OpenAPI subdirectory that I can run. And when I execute these build scripts, they will build just the OpenAPI related dependencies within the project. You'll see here we have this OpenAPI.slnf file. This is a solution filter file. If you're not familiar, solution filters essentially give you, I like to think of it as like a view into a top level solution file. So you can say, this is a solution that only consists of this subset of projects that are referenced in the top level solution. So we use that within each subdirectory to indicate what the actual dependencies of that area are. So you'll see lots of stuff's going through. Right now what it's building OpenAPI. It's building minimal APIs, since I have a sample application in this directory that's a minimal API. And then it goes and it builds Kestrel and some server dependencies, since you need those to build a minimal API. And it brings in some MVC-related dependencies, since I have a controller-based sample application in my OpenAPI project.
And that's
it's not going to go through.
To like, if I want to test things, like that's presumably enough then to actually run stuff. I know people are asking like, what if I want to actually run and test something? Like this will build enough of the dependency graph so you can still execute stuff in that part of the stack.
Yep, absolutely. It's not going to build like SignalR or Blazor, since these are not needed in my projects. And now I'm in a position where I've built stuff. I can actually start to run things locally. So what I'll need to do, remember I was talking about that locally installed .NET. I will need to activate that .NET environment in my current shell session in order to be able to actually run things. So I'm going to go ahead and say source, and then the file that I want to invoke is this activate shell script. And what this is going to do is it's going to set the .NET path that is in my application, or that it's in my environment, to the locally installed .NET. You'll see here the directory it refers to is under the repository that I just cloned. And now when I call .NET, what I'm actually calling is the 10.0 alpha builds that we are referencing in our repository. So now I can run stuff like there's a sample app in here. I can do .NET run. It's going to go ahead and do a restore and build again. And this will run the sample application using development bits of the OpenAPI functionality in ASP.NETCore. I can access it in my browser, as one does. I do have to go to a specific route. Okay, yeah. And here's like a sample app. It's got some OpenAPI stuff that's just for testing. And sample apps are one way that I can kind of interact with and test out my changes. But more often than not, what you actually want to do is you want to actually like edit some code. Once you have activated the .NET environment in your shell script, a pattern that you can do from the CLI is you can call code dot within the subdirectory you want to work on, and it will open up VS Code in that repository. And you can now start editing your source files locally. I do recommend, and actually I think our docs recommend this as well, you take advantage of things like the C# extension and the C# developer kit in VS Code to kind of get things like F12 and like language server support. It should also bring in a test explorer that you can use for interacting with all of the tests in the repository and whatnot. When it comes to tests in the repository, generally every directory within the project has the same.
I think you need to move us over so we can see the Solution Explorer.
Oh, sorry.
Our heads.
Yeah. Okay. And boom. Okay.
Okay. Can you see the side now?
Yeah. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So there's the Solution Explorer. You can use that. Confession, I honestly just use the File Explorer view. It works well for me, but the Solution Explorer is there if that's your preferred way. You are free to do as you wish. The sky's the limit. But generally, every kind of area or subdirectory is going to have a source folder that contains the actual source code. It's going to have a test directory. That's where you will find integration and unit tests related to that area. Some, not all of the areas will have a sample directory, and that sample directory will contain some sort of sample project that you can run and build, like the one that I just showed. And then for OpenAPI, there's another optional directory that you might see in some places, which is this perf directory, which contains a set of benchmark.net benchmarks for profiling code in the repo. So generally, you're always going to see a source directory and a test directory where you can make changes. Sometimes you'll see samples, and then sometimes you'll see perf and micro benchmarks in a repo. But all of the projects generally have that same structure: source, test, sample, perf. Super fun. Let me see if my project resolution. Okay, cool. I was waiting for all of the C# DevKit things to do their thing. You can, use the test explorer with C# DevKit. Here you can see all of the tests that are related to the OpenAPI area in ASP.NETCore. You can run and debug them, all of that good stuff. Source files are available for editing, yada, yada. This is where you can make changes, yada, yada. I kind of just yada, yada over like the post part of this, which is making...
from VS Code, do things like, and you're using that activated .NET SDK instance, right? Does VS Code just pick that stuff up? Because I think with VS, don't you have to like run the special VS when you're on a Windows machine in order to get the tooling to work correctly? Is that right?
Yes, great question. Yeah. So in VS Code, the pattern is activate the locally installed .NET and then run code . And that environment will translate from your shell session to the VS Code instance that you start. The same pattern kind of applies for Visual Studio, but we've encapsulated behind the scenes in this start VS command. So if you're developing with Visual Studio on a Windows-based device, you can run startvs.cmd, and it will activate the .NET environment and launch Visual Studio in that activated environment for you. And you kind of get the same experience to be able to develop locally. You might actually, now we're getting into like kind of fun things you run into, which is on both Visual Studio and VS Code. You may have to go through and set some settings that allow you to use preview SDKs in those editors. Because as I mentioned, we use preview SDKs. And I know on VS Code, if you're on Mac, you have to set it for Mac OS because of signing things. But
I can speak to on VS, if you're in the stable VS version, like the one that's not the preview channel, but the stable channel of Visual Studio, there's an option that you go check to say, I would like to enable use of preview SDKs. And that will then allow that Visual Studio to pick up even preview versions of the SDK. If you don't have that checked, it will only pick up the latest stable version of the .NET SDK that you have installed. If you're in a preview channel version of VS, which oftentimes I would guess when working with ASP.NETCore, like development, you might actually want to be using the preview version of VS because there might be things that are also happening in VS to accommodate changes that are happening in the latest version of the SDK. VS and the SDK often are collaborating together on what they're doing. So there might be like language features or like Razor stuff that doesn't work quite right in the stable version of VS that's being worked on in the preview version of VS while we're building it out in the .NET platform. That will automatically pick up preview versions of .NET SDKs without you having to do anything.
Yeah. The fact that everything's kind of on the latest and greatest is probably, if you're a .NET developer in other situations, might be new to you. So if you run into any issues, one thing you can do is you can open an issue on the ASP.NETCore repo, explaining whatever problem you ran into while setting up the repo for contributing, and usually will help you out and answer any questions.
A few real quick questions on this here. There's one, do we need C# dev kit preview? So
even with the stable VS, like most stuff will probably still just work. There just might be some like newer, like any places where like the SDK and the tooling kind of intersect might not work quite right. Like tooling might be broken, and or you might not get editor IntelliSense or something like that. So it should still mostly work even if you use the stable versions. But you can absolutely still switch to the preview channel of the C# dev kit SDK to see if that addresses some of that. But even doing that for a public developer, if someone doesn't have access to like internal builds, like you still might run into weirdness just because there's something that's, it's in the repo, but it's being addressed in the tooling, but it hasn't made it into any like public, even a public preview release of the tooling yet. So it's worth a shot, I would say. The trade-off there is that you might also run into other instabilities in using the preview version of the tooling, and that so pick which risk you would rather use. There was also a question about deactivating the SDK and how that's actually working. I think we should make sure people know how to get out of this state.
Yes, how do you get out of it? There is a deactivate command that gets enabled. So if you run it, it'll deactivate the environment. And then you are no longer in that deactivated instance. It should probably tell you that it deactivated, but just the fact that you can invoke it is an indicator that you can kind of step out of that activated context. And also if you close your like window session, it goes away since it's just within that particular instance. Oh my gosh, I have so many things I want to talk about, but we're running low on time, and I feel like we should kind of get to like the PR process, because I think that's kind of it's kind of an interesting thing to talk about. Cool. So let's say that you've made a contribution locally, you have made the change, you've committed it, you've pushed it to your branch, assuming that you are familiar with Git and whatnot. Now it's time to open a PR on the ASP.NETCore repo. So I'm going to do this now. And I'm going to open a PR from one of the changes that I've been working on recently. Let's see. I've been doing some work on validation support and minimal API. So we can pretend we're making a pull request for that. So this is the experience that you get when you create a pull request in GitHub. One of the things that you will see is we try and be helpful and give you a checklist of things that you should do before you open your pull request. You want to make sure you've read the contributor guide and code of conduct, so you kind of know proper decorum and like expectations on the repository. You want to include unit or integration tests for your change. And you want to make sure that you ran those tests locally too.
One of the most common reasons I think that PRs don't move forward is because they don't have tests, or the tests aren't.
Yep. Or the tests are in, but they weren't run locally, and so they fail on CI. So make sure that you've written the tests and you've run them locally. And if you run into issues with that, of course, feel free to ask questions. You've included docs for your change. Going back to what we talked about earlier, there's an open issue for the PR that you're making. That is the best way to like build consensus and just like set expectations ahead of time. So this checklist kind of helps you go through the basics of like, this is what you want to make sure that you've done before you've opened your PR. The contributor guide will outline things like following best practices and existing conventions in the repo. If you see that we're generally kind of like doing something a certain way, or you're making modification to a code base, kind of keep the patterns consistent there. I always recommend do a self-review of a PR before you open it. So I will usually just like go through and like read the things I've written just to make sure that there isn't anything obvious that's missing as a final sanity check. And then you actually want to fill out this template. So you want to give a little bit of a description of what your PR does. There's like the Copilot actions, which you can use if you're kind of stuck on like, oh, what do I write here to describe my change? You can like have Copilot help you a little bit. And then once you've done that, you can create the pull request. And we have code owners configured on the repo. If you're not familiar with what code owners is, it basically is a way for us to define which devs maintain certain areas of the repo. So you can scroll through and see, oh my gosh, Safia, I guess I help out on HTTP Client Factory or like gRPC or OpenAPI, etc. And this file is used to pull in automatically people who should review your PR. So that's kind of how the right person gets pinged whenever you open a pull request. We do have our talk on.
One detail, with the PR, I want to make sure people are aware also that I believe there's also a contributor license agreement that will come into play as an external contributor. And that's just to make sure that, you know, the code that you're contributing is your code, that you're not like grabbing some code from some product and then trying to check it into our open source repo, you know, those types of things. So you will need to sign that as an external contributor in order to be able to contribute to our repo.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you only need to do that once. So the first PR you open, it'll ask you to do the contributor license agreement. You just post a comment on the issue, and then that goes through and it's kind of cleared for future contributions. It's a great point.
That'll happen. I believe that happens automatically as part of submitting the PR, right? I think the tooling kicks in at some point there to ask you to sign that. So
which basically, like, once you've opened your PR, don't just like completely leave it alone. If it's your first PR, know that the bot is going to come in and ask you to sign the contributor license agreement. We do have a process for getting folks assigned to issues who own those areas. So you can see I've been assigned to a few that I post reviews on and whatnot. If you are a community member, your issue will get tagged with a community contribution label so that we know that it's from the community member and we can interact with it. Usually a review will be left on your issue. Timelines vary depending on a variety of things, but an indicator that your PR is pending input from you is this PR pending author input label that gets applied. Oh, gee, where was it? Okay, here it is. PR pending author input. So that means somebody has reviewed your PR, pasted some comments on changes that need to be made, and is now waiting for you to respond to it. To keep the PR backlog hygienic, we do have a process that will automatically close issues or PRs that have had no activity if they have had a PR pending author input label on them for like 2 to 3 weeks or something like that. So we try and generally only keep issues or PRs open that are kind of actively there's a back and forth on them.
I do want to speak briefly to the expectations also on the engineering team engaging with the PR. Like someone will be assigned. We try to be as responsive as possible to these contributions because we highly value the work the community is doing to help with the product. At the same time, the engineering team is also balancing this priority with a whole bunch of other priorities of like actually trying to build things that are part of the already committed parts of the .NET 10 release and so forth. So in particular parts of the release may be busier than others or more locked down than others. For example, if you submit a PR in like September or October where the release is basically being locked down in preparation for a stable release in November, like the .NET 9 release that we just shipped in November of 2024, then things might be a little slower, for example, because we're trying to avoid churn in the product. So be patient. We're working and trying to improve on being as responsive as possible to these contributions. But sometimes your PR might be sitting there and you might be wondering, is anyone going to look at this? And it may take a week or so before someone pings it. But we do our best, and we do appreciate the work that you do as part of trying to help us move our project forward.
I think that was it. I wanted to touch on like a couple of other things. Like one thing that I think comes up often is going back to like scratching your own itch comment earlier. Sometimes you might run into an issue in a version of .NET that we've already released, like .NET 9 or .NET 8. PRs that are merged into the main branch of our repository will ship in the next version of .NET. We have a special process for backporting bug fixes, usually, into already released versions of .NET, and that is the servicing process, which is also outlined in the docs directory that I talked about earlier. So just because something is merged into main doesn't mean that that bug fix is going to land in .NET 9 or .NET 8 or whatever version you're using for active development on your product. The servicing process talks about kind of what are the benchmarks for backporting a change in and kind of how that goes through and kind of the benchmark for that. So just know to build on top of Dan's comment, usually things merged go into the next version of .NET. Depending on when in the release lifecycle, you might have to do some special work to backport it.
To be also to be clear, that the bar for getting changes into a servicing release is significantly higher than getting it into the next stable release of .NET. Servicing releases are the patch releases that come out like every month, roughly, on Patch Tuesday often, that contain not only these bug fixes, but also like any security, like security notices that went out. Those go out on those patch releases as well. And there's no like preview process for those things. Those patch releases have to be production ready right from the start. Purely good. Should be no breaking changes, regressions in a patch release, because that might be preventing someone from like getting a fix to a security vulnerability as part of that patch. So the bar is very high to get things into the servicing releases, and that's just something to be aware of. We look at the nature of the fix, how severe is the problem, how important is it to get in, how risky is the changes that are being checked into the framework when considering doing servicing patch releases. Doesn't mean it can't be done. It's just something to be aware of, that they'll get a lot of scrutiny when you're trying to get a fix into an already shipping stable release.
Yeah, this is this doc is great to review, not just if you're a contributor, but if you're somebody trying to understand like, hey, what is the bar that we use? It kind of enumerates all of the specific kind of things we look for. So yeah.
I also wanted to say that some of these changes can be small, and like the process that I think you're describing, Safia, is pretty much what's involved when you're talking about a smaller change. Sometimes we were talking earlier, like Sync Fusion probably being the most extreme example of this, where we have a company or organization that wants to get some more significant functionality into the platform, like a whole feature that involves the API review process, the review of the design, and iterating on that. But also there's if it does get merged as a new feature in the stack, there's also the ongoing maintenance cost of maintaining that feature and supporting it, and as people give feedback on it, I'm doing improvements to it, performance improvements, or whatever it is. If you're planning to do a larger contribution, I encourage you to also think about, an ongoing commitment to that feature. Sometimes we can just absorb new functionality, and then our team can just maintain it going forward. But in some cases, we might actually need your help to maintain that feature as an ongoing investment, as opposed to sort of a one and done style interaction.
That's a good point too, and going way back to like what features are considered and that sort of thing, right? Because it's easy to write some code one time, but we have to service and maintain and you translate and document and all the stuff for code for a long time. So
yeah.
So those are the types of things that you talk with your organization about what level of commitment investment can we make into the .NET platform to get functionality that we want, and think of that not as a one-time deal, but potentially as an ongoing investment. Lots of organizations do this, where they carve out pieces of their company to contribute to open source projects on an ongoing basis. We do this at Microsoft for a lot of projects, not only for .NET, but we have teams that contribute to Python, and teams that contribute to Java, and teams that contribute to Rust, and that's something that you can consider doing also in your organization.
Wow. Okay. That was a lot.
Thanks a lot, Safia.
Sorry,
Amazing. Thank you so much.
No,
I know there's
really-
so much content. But again, if you have follow-up questions, the GitHub repo, the discussions tab, great place to reach out and like kind of follow up on everything that was covered here. I know it was very dense.
Well, can you actually click on that discussions just to make sure it's very
Yeah,
clear?
I don't think
Like,
we talk. Yeah, here we go. Discussions. This is kind of where you can ask questions or engage in conversation that doesn't pollute the issue tracker, but kind of gives you a chance to kind of discuss back and forth with folks. And this is also a great place to make contributions too, of just answering people's questions and whatnot.
Great. Wow. Okay. So I think this is like a fabulous kind of kickoff to like, hey, we're starting on .NET 10. Here's how you can get involved. And then next week, Dan, you're going to be remotely calling in from Prague, right?
Yeah, the Czech Republic. I've never been to the Czech Republic. I'm going to be exciting.
So
we'll be talking about our Blazor plans, or at least planning efforts, I would say, for .NET 10. It's not so much a roadmap announcement as it is us sharing what we're thinking about for Blazor in .NET 10, and having that conversation with you all about what do you want to see in Blazor for .NET 10? Are we prioritizing the right things?
Awesome. Okay. Well, let's wrap up there. Thanks so much, everybody. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye, folks.
Bye, folks.